help me give President Lockhart a very warm Paulding County welcome.
Sheila, thank you very much for that introduction, and I have to say I'm flattered that there's such a wonderful turnout today. Thank you for coming. As we were driving in, I took note that the Paulding County Detention Center is across the street. So I'm going to be a little careful what I say today. There's more of you than there are of me. I also want to introduce two of my colleagues, actually. Tom Cunningham. Tom, stand up if you would. We now have a system of designating what we call regional executives who are really oriented to talking to people in the economy and in various regions. We have 6 of them, and Tom is the regional executive for the state of Georgia. So it's his job to meet with groups like this and to get out and talk to people to try to get a real-time sense of what's actually happening and how you are experiencing the economy. I'd also like to introduce my colleague, Pierce Nelson. Pierce was responsible for getting us here today and only panicked a couple of times as we were driving from Atlanta. Pierce is responsible for a variety of things, including government relations and press relations. So it's great to be here. And yesterday I was in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, talking to a similar group, and they actually had some business at the beginning of their meeting, including coming up with the slogan for the group, which I thought was almost perfect. They said, "Business leaders making their community better." And I think that probably sums up why you're all part of the chamber here. And it's been my experience over the years that in community development, very, very little happens if the business community doesn't get on board and take the lead. So I applaud you for your involvement in the Paulding County Chamber of Commerce. Community-based people, business people, as I mentioned in introducing Tom, also play an important role in helping us understand what's going on in the economy, and we typically ask people questions to get an on-the-ground view of what's happening. We're interested in questions like whether businesses are making investments or not, whether you're seeing stronger sales, whether you're building staff, that is hiring people or have plans to hire people, and importantly to the question of inflation, whether you're passing through price pressures or price increases that you may be experiencing. Sometimes this information we can actually extrapolate to the national level and helps me in preparing for the Federal Open Market Committee meetings, and this may be on your cheat sheet. That's the primary monetary policy forming entity of the Federal Reserve. And then sometimes really local information. Part of our job is to try to distinguish between what you might call truly local idiosyncratic information and that reflects what's going on in the country overall. To give you an idea of what I'd like to do today, I want to walk you through what we would consider a pretty conventional treatment of current economic concerns. I'll start with a few comments on the Atlanta area and Paulding County. I'll then provide my views on the state of and outlook for the national economy. I'll comment on the headwinds, and that's almost a technical economic term, headwind. That's headwinds that are holding back stronger economic growth for the country, as well as the key risks to the outlook that I will lay out. And then I'll close with a few points on the Fed's monetary policy, particularly with the question that I engage every few weeks before I go to a Federal Open Market Committee meeting, and And that question is current policy appropriate to the outlook and risks? It's important that I make the point that when we set policy, we're always looking ahead. So we're always basing policy on an outlook or a forecast. Forecasting is a challenging exercise, so we are always operating with a certain degree of uncertainty that accompanies any effort to forecast. As you listen today, please understand that these are my personal views. I'm not speaking for the Federal Reserve, and my views may not be shared by my colleagues on the FOMC or in the Federal Reserve System. I would describe the pace of the ongoing economic recovery in the United States as moderate, and that's true also for the state of Georgia. While conditions in Georgia have been improving since 2009, progress has remained relatively slow. The state's unemployment rate is down 1.6 percentage points from its peak in 2010. Closer to home, here in Paulding County and Atlanta, the unemployment rate in greater Atlanta continues to decline, reaching 8.8%, and that's versus a national number now of 8.2% in April, and that's compared to a peak of 10.5% in 2010. Here in Paulding County, the unemployment rate has declined a bit further to 8% at the moment, according to our data. I have heard repeatedly from business contacts in this area that the challenge for Paulding County and for the entire metro Atlanta area remains dealing with the consequences of the real estate downturn. As you know, Paulding County was one of the fastest growing counties in the nation during the previous decade. The recent recession and resulting decline in population growth left many residential and commercial developments stressed. I note with great interest the plans that you have in Paulding County to grow and attract a wider variety of businesses, transforming from a bedroom community to a more resilient center for business will help alleviate some of the stresses caused by a concentration in real estate. While it will take time, this area and the Atlanta region as a whole will eventually emerge from the real estate slump. Looking to the more immediate future, though, most of our business contacts in the state and the region are planning for a continuation of the modest growth trends we have witnessed to date, while keeping an eye on risks at the national and even international level that could, if they materialize, actually be felt here. World news and the flow of data at the national level evoke a similar mixed and cautious reaction at the moment. Coming off a reasonably strong fourth quarter in 2011, the indicators of economic strength so far in 2012 have been underwhelming. First quarter gross domestic product was recently revised down from the original number of 2.2% growth, that's an annualized growth number, to 1.9%. So the first quarter was below 2%. The May employment report, combined with the downward revisions to the March and April job statistics, was clearly a disappointment. Now, there remains some question about the degree that weather-related effects were being seen in the numbers, weather-related payback from the rather robust job growth earlier in the year. Losses in construction jobs, for example, were unexpectedly large in May, possibly reflecting better strength earlier in the year. But it is nearly impossible to escape the conclusion that we are replaying in some manner the spring and summer slowdowns of the past 2 years. The economy remains in recovery, but as the disappointing employment numbers illustrate, the economy is working against some strong headwinds. Let me delineate those headwinds. First, key sectors of the economy are still deleveraging, reducing debt. This is true of the household and financial sectors. In the household sector, for example, while some categories of consumer credit are expanding, overall consumer debt, including mortgage-related debt, is still declining, and the debt service to income ratio is shrinking. Deleveraging is arguably a fundamental improvement for the long term. But for the short term or for the medium term, as financial institutions and households return their balance sheets to health, deleveraging is not conducive to spirited growth. Second headwind, the housing sector remains weak, even while recently showing signs of stabilization and improvement. Home prices, and I would say more than house building, influence the health of the broad economy through their effect on consumer attitudes. Home prices in many markets appear to be stabilizing, but there remains a sizable inventory of unsold homes that is likely to work against a sustained firming or upturn in home values. At the same time, the government sector overall, including importantly state and local government, continues to contract. A shift of relative weight in the economy from the public to the private sector requires significant adjustments. Labor and other resources have to be reallocated to other areas of the economy. These adjustments take time, and they also limit the pace at which the economy can reasonably be expected to expand. Finally, there continues to be what I'll call an uncertainty drag on confidence and economic activity. While the makeup of the array of uncertainties has moved over time, and the intensity of the restraining effect has modulated, it's clear that uncertainty is holding back hiring and capital expansion plans of U.S. businesses. As a result of these various headwinds, I expect the recovery process to be slow and drawn out. I think the most reasonable expectation is moderate growth, a slow and possibly halting decline of unemployment, with inflation staying close to the Federal Open Market Committee's 2% target. And I don't see this narrative changing much to the upside over the medium term. Let me describe the key elements of this, what I would call this baseline outlook. The modest recovery and associated slow job growth is keeping income growth subdued. These conditions are likely, in my view, to restrain consumer or retail spending. Consumer spending has been running a little stronger than income growth over the past year, supported by a drop in the rate of personal savings. This is not healthy for the longer term. Without a marked acceleration in household income growth, which again is not in my baseline projection, consumer spending growth will likely be held in check. Export growth has been strong over the recovery, and U.S. manufacturers in particular have benefited from growth of exports to emerging economies. The slowdown in Europe has resulted in some cooling of overall export growth and a slowing of U.S. manufacturing. Our trade imbalance at the national level, with imports exceeding exports by a good measure, could well be exacerbated by the recent appreciation of the dollar, the growth in the value of the dollar on the export side, and the relative strength of the U.S. economy as a driver of imports. As I already mentioned, the decline in government spending has been a net drag over most of the past 3 years and is likely to be a slight negative factor or possibly worse over the medium term. Now, these are the key factors that are influencing my baseline forecast for the medium term. As I said earlier, forecasting is a dynamic exercise. We continually reevaluate key assumptions and risks that both affect the outlook, that is, they are in the outlook or in the forecast, and pose potentially high impact contingencies that are not in the baseline forecast. It's my sense at the moment that risks to the economic outlook are gathering. So it's worthwhile to spend a little time talking about the risks in some detail. In my view, there is an array of serious concerns, but I'll emphasize 4 key potential sources of downside risk. They are the behavior of home prices, the effect of sharp federal fiscal adjustment, financial instability along with recession in Europe, and a slowdown in emerging market economies. For our Atlanta Fed forecast, we assume that home prices will hold steady, a view that I would argue is supported by recent readings from a variety of home price indicators, such as the Case-Shiller and CoreLogic indexes. I've already cited the housing sector as a headwind. It's also a risk in that a large further drop in home values could undermine my outlook for the economy. Turning to fiscal adjustment. Without congressional action, current law calls for increases in taxes and reductions in federal spending to begin on January 1st, 2013. Estimates of the seriousness of the so-called fiscal cliff vary, but most indicate that the immediate, that is the 2013 impact on the economy would be negative and large. The Congressional Budget Office, for example, estimates that without congressional action, mandated spending cuts and tax increases would cut the federal deficit by 4% or more of GDP. And the CBO notes that this could be large enough to push the U.S. economy into recession during the first half of 2013. Now back to my baseline projection. My baseline projection assumes that while some amount of federal fiscal restraint on growth is likely, the phase-in of tax and spending actions will occur more gradually, mitigating the cliff effects that I just described. Let me now turn to the risk posed by the situation in Europe. I am giving more weight and higher probability to a negative influence on our economy coming from Europe than I did as recently as the last FOMC meeting in late April. So I'd like to spend a little time today developing this scenario in more detail. First, the euro area as a whole is in or near recession, as I mentioned earlier. Southern Europe is contracting sharply. Of the larger euro area economies, only Germany appears to be showing much resilience. A more severe euro area recession will negatively impact the U.S. economy through the export and tourism channel.